Hello and welcome to this update from Freedom of Religion South Africa, or FEDSAS. My name is Advocate Nadene Badenhorst. I'm here with FEDSAS Executive Director Michael Swain to give you a summary to the OGOD judgment and its important implications for public schools throughout South Africa. Now, as you may know, this case was brought by a secular group called the Organisation for Religious Education and Democracy, or OGOD, against 6 public schools which openly promoted Christian values and a Christian ethos. OGOD essentially asked the court to do 2 things. Number 1, to declare that it is illegal for a school to promote a single faith ethos or to advertise itself as having a particular religious ethos or character. And number 2, to grant an interdict prohibiting 71 Christian practices from taking place at school, ranging from the very generalized to the very specific. Now, had OGOD succeeded in its objectives, then instead of freedom of religion being protected in schools, they would have become spiritually sterile environments with freedom from religion, very similar to the situation which exists in the USA.
Now, the case was heard before 3 judges in the Johannesburg High Court in the month of May, with FEDSAS legal counsel assisting one of the parties who acted as a friend of the court in the matter. Judgment was handed down on June 28th and was not appealed by any of the parties. Therefore, as a result, this judgment is now in force and not only applies to the 6 schools that were parties in the case, but also to the 24,000 plus public schools nationwide. However, it does not apply to private schools or to public schools that were built on land that is privately owned by religious organisations or denominations, and their status and religious character is specifically protected by the Schools Act. Nevertheless, it is now very important for teachers, learners, parents, school governing bodies known as SGBs, religious practitioners and ministries working into schools to understand this judgment and its implications. So, Nadene, jog us through what the judgment says.
Michael, the judgment has some good news and potentially some bad news for public schools who up to now have held themselves out as schools of a particular religious character. Now, the good news is that the court did not grant the interdict that OGOD asked for to ban the 71 Christian practices it had itemized from public schools. Instead, the court confirmed the constitutional principle that religious observances, which has a broad meaning and includes, for instance, reading of scripture, singing of religious songs, prayer times, scripture union activities, even religious dress, dietary customs, that those observances may take place at public schools. However, all religious observances are subject to the following 3 conditions. Number 1, they must take place in terms of rules established by the school governing body. Number 2, they must take place on an equitable basis. And number 3, attendance must always be free and voluntary. Now, I'd like us to look at each one of these in a little bit more detail. I said number 1 is they must take place in terms of rules established by the school governing body. Now, what does that mean? The court emphasized that public schools belong to the community, not the state, and that it is therefore the responsibility of the community to take ownership of the school through representation on its school governing body. So if a public school does not currently have rules regarding the conduct of religious observances, then the school governing body should firstly establish such rules. And ideally, this will happen through a process of consultation, a type of family discussion where the school's parents define what they believe is needed for their children to practice and express their religious beliefs freely in the school environment. But this process must take into account that South Africa is a diverse society where people, including learners, hold to different religious beliefs. And as such, these rules, because schools are dynamic, may have to be revised from time to time. The OGOD judgment suggests that in addition to ensuring that religious observances take place on an equitable basis and are always free and voluntary, the rules should also cover the situation where religious practitioners or organizations work into the school. And it should be emphasized that if the school governing body so decides, there is nothing to prevent religious practitioners and ministries working with and assisting the school. And in many cases, this may be welcomed by both the school and the parents. So that's number 1, rules established by the school governing body. Number 2, they must always take place on an equitable basis. Now, what does this mean? This means that a public school must act even-handedly and fairly in relation to learners of all different religions or no religion at all, taking into account once again that we do live in a diverse society where there should be space for all to practice their religious beliefs, including in public schools. Now, of course, what this looks like may vary from school to school and even from time to time, depending amongst other things on the learner makeup, the needs, etc. of the school. But again, this is something for the school governing body to work out on grassroots level. Importantly, the judgment does not oblige public schools to conduct multi-faith religious observances, for instance, by reading in one session or on a rotational basis from different religious texts in school assembly, or praying a universal prayer, or having a moment of silence. So that's number 2, equitable basis. Number 3, attendance must be free and voluntary. This means that every learner has a choice on whether or not to attend a religious observance. It is advisable to clearly and continuously communicate to learners that they have this choice and that they should not feel any obligation or any pressure to attend. A practical example of this would be to allow a single Muslim or an atheist learner to stay away for the first part of an assembly rather than have to come in, leave, and come back in again. Importantly, the court did not find that it is illegal for public schools to request learners to state what particular religion they associate with, if any at all. Now, we said that there is potentially some bad news as well. So what is it, Michael? Can you run us through that?
Well, yes, and if this is as bad as it gets, it's really not such bad news. The court did rule in its judgment that it is illegal for a public school, number 1, to promote or allow its staff to promote that it, as a public school, adheres to only one or predominantly only one religion to the exclusion of others. And number 2, to hold out that it promotes the interests of any one religion in favour of others. Now, the implication of this is that if a school currently has been promoting a single religious ethos, it will now need to take steps to reverse this both externally and internally. Now, this may include revising, for example, its prospectus, its websites, its letterheads. It may also have implications on the school badge, its motto, potentially even the school anthem. And it will also mean, of course, that teachers should not promote their personal religious views to the exclusion of all others in the school contexts. So, from a practical point of view, what does all this mean? Well, number 1, the implication of this is that if a school does not have a religious policy, it should now make sure that it develop one, ideally through a process of consultation and taking into account that South Africa is a diverse society where people, including learners, obviously hold to different religious beliefs. Number 2, if a school does not know how to develop this type of policy, it should ask for advice from organisations like the Federation of Governing Bodies of South African Schools, FEDSAS, or 4SA, and we can point you in the right direction. Number 3, once a school has developed a policy, it should ensure that everyone concerned knows how this policy works, including, of course, teachers, learners, and especially parents who are enrolling their children in the school for the first time. These rules should also, of course, have a process for handling complaints from a parent or from a child, and they need to be, as we've said, revised from time to time just to make sure that they remain suitable. So, essentially, school governing bodies now must go back to the drawing board at grassroots level and make sure that their religious policy and rules for religious observances are compliant with the parameters given both in the Constitution and confirmed by this judgment. In terms of time frame, although the court did not make any prescription on this, there's an expectation that schools will immediately begin this process to make sure that they do comply. However, and very importantly, schools and their school governing bodies should not be bullied or unduly pressurised by external or internal groups to make drastic changes in haste. So, why don't you sum up for us, Nadine?
Sure, Michael. So to sum up, a single faith branding or ethos is no longer permitted for a public school. However, religious observances may continue to form a vibrant part of school life, and secularism is definitely not the policy for schools. We can therefore continue to enjoy freedom of religion in schools, not freedom from religion.
Yeah.
In closing, we trust that this has been helpful, although we would like to emphasize that this is simply intended to serve as a general guideline. It may be wise to obtain legal advice for your particular school or religious organization. Thank you for watching. For more information on religious freedom issues, please visit our website at www.forsa, that's forsa.org.za. You can sign up for our newsletters there, read our latest articles, and also donate to support our mission to promote and protect freedom of religion in South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you.